Hey there, Chris here for Personal Tech, and in this video we're going to go over how to install Lutron Wallbox dimmers. We're going to be installing RadioRa2 today, but this is really going to apply from an electrical standpoint to Ra2, Homeworks, Caseta, or really any Wallbox dimmer that Lutron makes. As electrically they're all the same, it's only when you come to programming and system configuration that there's any difference. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a look at my lighting report here, which I've pulled down from the program file. You should find this in your job file. The first thing I'm going to do is take a look and find my area here. I'm in the master bathroom at the bedroom entry. I see my wall box here. I've got my existing switches that the electrician wired up for us. And I can see I've got two pro dimmers left and right. I've stocked my pro dimmers here on the floor. And then I can give these a quick test to make sure they are correctly turning on the lights that we expect. So I know that this is good to go. I also happen to know that one of these is a three-way, so we're going to be following this in installation in another room. I've also stocked that area with the appropriate dimmers. So let's get started. First thing I've done is just simply unscrew these dimmers and pull them out of the wall. First thing I need to do is identify my hot wire. I'll use my voltage pen for that, hopefully. There we go. Green means it's on. I suspect it's this one. It is. If I see I've got it hot up here too, but that's because this is a three-way dimmer. If I switch that, the hot will switch to the other side. That's actually the traveler, I should say, will switch to the other side. So this is my hot, which I can see is looped over to this dimmer, and this is actually going to be the incoming hot from my electrical panel, and I can see that looks like it's made up into a bundle of hots. So first thing to do is pull that off and make it safe. Turn these off so they don't spark at me. I'm going to carefully remove this jumper. That's not hot, that was just heating up the other dimmer. Here's my actual hot wire. Being a little bit stubborn because it's number 12. Interestingly, this jumper was number 14. Because I'm not actually going to reutilize this switch, I'm just going to back this screw off all the way to make that a little bit easier to pull out. That's a convenient way of getting rid of that hot when we don't want it. I'm going to straighten this sucker out and put a wire nut on him so we can more easily work on this box for the next few minutes. Always a good idea to have some spare wire nuts, spare scraps of wire when you're doing this type of installation. There we go. I'm going to double check one more time with my tick tracer here. Make sure that nothing else is hot, so I don't unexpectedly get zapped. Nothing is, so I'm good to go. Now I can remove the other wires. Interestingly, number 14 here too. You can tell that this is a retrofit job and sort of whatever hot wires were on hand were likely used. So, as a general strategy for installing wallbox dimmers, I like to keep the hot in the down low position and my switch legs in the high position, as that's the way that they're going to connect on the new Lutron dimmer. I'm also going to straighten out this wire for these sconces, as I know that I'm going to use a stab-in type of connection on my dimmer with this number 14, and I'm obviously going to have to use a twist connector. Or twist that around the screw, I should say, for my number 12. I'll do the same thing here. I've got a red wire. And a black wire, and these are both travelers, so I'm going to bring those both up. And again, these are number 14. I know I can use a stab-in type connection, so I'm going to straighten them out. Last thing I'm going to do to prepare this box before I put my dimmers in is make up some neutral connections. Now, this is an optional step as I'm using my Pro dimmer, but it's good to understand the process because it's not optional for things like your neutral switch. And we would always expect better performance and better reliability if I've got a neutral wire in. You can see that this box is a little tight. There's a lot of wire in here. The makeups are not super clean, so I'm going to very carefully take this switch leg, which was over here, and try to disentangle it from these neutrals. I'm going to be careful to not touch anything hot in the process. There we go, my neutral's coming out where I want them. I'm going to take this opportunity to push these makeups back in a bit farther too, as they're going to be in the way if they're taking up this much space when I go to install my dimmers. So making sure that that wire nut is securely on there. I'm going to try to get him to go all the way in the back so that I got more room for my other devices. A handy tool to help this is my linesman pliers. Should give me a little bit more leverage. Let me push on that and condense those wires a little bit more strongly to go back in there. You can see that there's a good bit of sheathing on the Romex, which really should be stripped off a little bit more. It'll let these wires separate out a little bit easier, and it would make this a little bit simpler of an installation, but it's not the way it's going today. There we go. These are ground wires, so I don't need to worry about shorting anything out. Now I got that bundled nice and tight in the wall there. That's going to make it a bit easier for me to get my dimmers in where they need to be. I'm going to grab a little scrap bit of white number 14 wire here, and I'm going to make up 2 neutral pigtails. I'm going to strip off about 1 inch on each end. Carefully undo my neutral bundle. I'm going to add these guys to it, and you can see there's already a mix of number 12 and number 14 in here. Obviously it would be ideal if we had a single gauge of wire. If this is a number 15 breaker or 15 amp breaker, then this would meet code and be just fine. If this is a 20 amp breaker, this would not meet code. I should probably refer this to the electrician for a little bit of maintenance. I'm going to sort of pre-twist these around here just to help them more easily go in the wire nut. And set that on there. I'm going to crank that down nice and tight to make sure that bundle is secure. There we go. There we go. And now, to make 2 from 1, I'll just simply do that. There we go, 2 neutral pigtails. Now I need to get these connections back in here. Ground always goes first. My neutral bundle is going to go second. Now this is a bunch of thick gauge wire, so this is going to take a little bit of elbow grease. And I may need my pliers again. Actually, Ryan's pliers.
Highways.
Oh, actually, highways pliers that Ryan stole. They've been stolen multiple times. Nice pliers, actually.
Okay. Shout out to Highways pliers.
Oh man. Yeah, you can see these wires don't want to cooperate, but I need to get them further back in there because that's not going to be sufficient clearance. There we go. Condense that wire nut to go where it needs to be, and then I'm going to close these and use that blunt edge to try to push these back. Okay, That's better. I think I'm going to be in good shape there. At least better shape with the neutral bundle. I may continue to manipulate that as I try to get the hot bundle in. So the next thing you notice is there's a single hot wire coming to my dimmer. I've obviously got two dimmers. It's not ideal to loop from one dimmer to the next the way it was done previously, so I'm going to take that off. Do the same thing I just did with my neutral bundle to get two hots. And I'm actually going to take out this piece of number 12. This is all number 14 wiring, so really should be using number 14 for this hot as well. There we go. I'm going to get that down nice and tight, just like I did on the other one. And now I'm going to try to find a way to get all these wires to cooperate and go where we need them. Okay. Okay, that's got a much better chance of working there. This wire nut here is probably going to be my biggest problem. I'm going to see if I can convince him to go in a little further. You really want to manipulate this stuff before you try to put a Wallbox dimmer in, because it's really not going to move anywhere with the dimmer and just the pressure of the screw if you can't push it. I can see that even though it's protruding a little bit now, it pretty easily pushes back, so when I tighten down that screw, I'm fairly confident that that's going to go where I need it to go. I'm going to bring this one neutral over to this side of the box, because this is where the connection is going to be, this dimmer. This guy's going to go right here. Get in there. And then I'm going to clip this guy just like I did for my other connection. Okay, I'm now ready to start laying with some dimmers. Oh, look at that neutral pigtail. Should have known Lutron had us covered. So, I've got all number 14 connectors here, so the first thing I'm going to do is tighten these screws, because I know I can just use a stab-in connector on any wire that needs it. If I had a number 12 wire, I would need to back these off so that I could wrap. I'm always going to start with my dimmer air gap here. I can see that this wire is actually a bit too long. I'm going to trim them down to about 5/8 and stab in first my switch light, then my neutral, which I might shorten up a tiny bit, and strip to about the same 5/8. Stab that in. That was actually still a little too long. You can see that I've got more exposed copper than I really want there. I'm going to pull that out. I do that by inserting a flathead screwdriver, release the pressure. Bit shorter here. nice secure connection, very little exposed copper. And last but not least, my hot, which definitely is too long. And again, I'm going to strip. I'm going to do this very carefully because obviously this is a live wire. An optional step here would be turning off the circuit breaker. And again, double check my air gap is pulled. It's not. This happens a lot. It accidentally gets popped in while you're working on the dimmer, so I'm going to double check that that's popped. Stab in my connector, and this dimmer's done. All I got to do is set him back in the box. I want to make sure to figure out the best way for this wire to go back in and precondition it to want to bend that way as I push the dimmer in. I'm not just going to shove this in blindly because it'll just sort of get tangled up and it won't cooperate. But if I give them a bend that they want to follow, then those wires are much more likely to do what I expect and cooperate as I put that dimmer back. I'm not going to screw this in right now because I've got another dimmer next to it, but I am going to make sure that it fits so that when I go to screw it in, I know what to expect. And there you can see it does fit with that bundle of wire in the wall. I'll let it hang just loose for now. On to my next dimmer. I'm going to get rid of this ground pigtail. I'm going to tighten down all these screws. And then I'm going to go back to my switch legs here. Now, this is a three-way, so I've got both a black and a red. In a three-way, we're going to have one wire that is going to go straight through on black. That is going to actually carry the current. And another wire that's going to go to the blue screw on both dimmers that is going to basically serve as communication between the two dimmers. And it doesn't really matter which color I pick, as long as I make sure I keep it consistent. The great thing about Lutron is they expect you to screw up and wire this backwards, and it is fault tolerant. So really, no matter how I plug this in, it's not going to break the dimmer. It probably won't work if I do something wrong, but I'm not worried about actually damaging the dimmer. So I'm going to say that I'm going to take my black wire here and use that as my actual load, and then my red wire as my dimmer. I need to straighten this guys out a little more, and I'll also probably trim them up here so they don't have a ton of exposed copper. And then I'm going to use my red as my blue wire, or blue screw terminal. Black as my traveler. And then of course white is my neutral. And this other black is my hot. And last but not least, my hot, which needs to be trimmed up quite a bit. Stripped about 5/8. Air gap first, and then land. Again, I'm going to manipulate these wires so that they go where I expect them to. When I push this back in, I'm not just going to shove it in and hope for the best. I'm going to be careful not to touch these screws on this dimmer, as the bottom one is hot. Oops, I accidentally turned that on. Careful not to do that. This is good. Something generally in the right direction. Let's see. You can see there, I'm not quite going in quite as easily as I'd hoped. So I need to work on where I can get these wires to go. I'll try to find some empty space at the top of the wall box for my switch legs. I'll give these guys a bit of an S-bend so that they can collapse a little bit more easily as they go back. S-bends They're your friends when it comes to shoving a Wallbox dimmer in the Wallbox. And it does fit. A little bit of effort to get it in there, but it does. So I'm going to leave these out. I might put some screws in just to hold them in place. But then I'm going to go to the other side of the three-way and trim that end out so I can truly test the entire circuit. Let's get my trash box handy here. Put the trash in. Important part of any project. That'll do, just to hold these in so they're not flailing around while I'm working on the end. That's one side of the Wallbox done. Let's go to the other. I've got something very similar here. I've got a single pole and I've got my three-way. Got a little bit more space in this Wallbox, so this should be a little easier. So this is going to be my three-way, and this is my single pole. And again, you can see I need to make up some neutrals here. First thing I'll do is turn off these lights. We'll loosen these screws. These look like number 11, so they should pull off easily. I'll also, of course, check to see which one is hot. I expect nothing to be hot on here because the hot's on the other side, but one of these certainly will be. It should be the bottom one, and it is. And then here, nothing is hot. So I've just got to worry about this one wire right there. Oh, very tight wire here. It's so tight that I can't really get my hand in there to manipulate it, so I'm just going to back the screw all the way off. If I wanted to reuse this, I just want to grab that screw and put it back on before going any further. But if I'm not concerned about reusing it, then that doesn't really matter. There we go, screw it off. There you go, I've got my wire, the hot wire, pulled out. Lutron is nice enough to give me a wire nut in each box. So I'm going to use that to cap him off while I work on this. Okay, again, my switch leg up, my hot wire down, and let's pull this one off. Now I should be safe because I've got my air gap pulled on the other side, so I should not have any voltage here on any of these screws. Two of these are brass, which indicates my two travelers, and the other one is black, which should, if it's wired properly, indicate that that's the switch leg going to these lights. So in this case, I'm actually going to put my switch leg up and my travelers down to keep them straight. This is all number 14, so I'm just going to straighten these out so I can do an easy back wire. I'll go ahead and shorten them up. I'm going to just look in here to verify that these are both coming out of the same Romex, just to try to visually verify what's going on. I can see they sort of cluttered up, not the world's best makeup in here, but they are coming out of the same Romex. Take the opportunity to just sort of dial this in a little bit. Not the world's cleanest ever box, but there's not that much wire in it. I do have neutrals in the box, which is great. I'm going to tuck these neutrals in, and on this neutral, which is tied to the lights above me, I'm going to add a pigtail for this dimmer, just so it's got the best possible reliability. this should be a little easier. So not quite as much going on here. There we go. Much simpler. Hopefully the rest of them are like that. I'm going to get the bundle back in there. Try to give myself as much space as possible. And you can see here, this is a good reference, the pre-stripped length on that wire that came out of the Lutron box. That's what we're shooting for with all of these. About 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to go ahead and put in this RadioRa2 accessory dimmer first. I'm going to go ahead and land my my travelers first. This one's on the blue screw, because I did the red on the blue screw to the other side. My other traveler is actually going to come in as my hot, my black screw. If you have any questions about this, look at the wiring manual that comes with these, because depending on what dimmer you're using on the other side, there is some issues about where these two need to go, but they're both going to go on this side. I'm going to go ahead and land my switch leg on the brass. And then I've got a lot more room here, so it should be a lot easier to get these dimmers to convince them to go back in the box the way I want them. So this shouldn't fight me nearly as much as I did on the other side. There we go, much simpler that time. Okay. Last but not least, I've got my other Pro dimmer. Let's tighten all these screws down. And with the air gap out, I'm going to go in the same order. Now this guy's really tight, so he might be a little tricky to get in there. Might have to use my pliers to get where my hands won't quite go. There we go, switch leg. Neutral. And actually, I forgot that's a number 12 wire, so I need to back this screw off because I've got to wrap it around. I'll put this down so I can work on this wire. With my wire strippers, I'm going to use this hole here, which is designed to let me give this guy a nice gentle bend without having to struggle. I'm going to wrap this wire in the same orientation that the screw turns, so that as I turn the screw to tighten it, it is pulling that wire in and not pushing that wire away. You see, if I had the screw going the other way, or the wire going the other way, the screw would want to push it out. In this case, the screw is pushing it in. There we go. Convince this guy to go back in, which he does pretty easily, and now it's time to test. Put my air gaps in, and hopefully, voila, we've got light. Let's go test our three-way. For that, we're going to need to come to the other side and push this air gap in. If we wire this correctly, the lights should come on. If we wired it incorrectly, we're not going to have any light. There we go. The last test of a three-way is to make sure you can control and dim the lights from both sides. So this side, my control is working fine, my on-off, my dim is working fine. If I can do the same thing on the other side, we're all good. So, toggle button does indeed toggle the lights, and our raise and lower should lower the lights. I can see that it's working there. So we've done this correctly. All it's left to do is put some screws in and put some finished wall plates on.